thank you for the opportunity to be here today and visit with your members. We're hoping to provide some coverage of the different programs that are part of the what was called the Economic Aid Act, which was signed into law on December 27th, that are being sort of distributed through the Small Business Administration. And really the probably centerpiece of that legislation is the a new iteration of the Paycheck Protection Program, which I think a lot of folks probably had some experience with already, as the CARES Act was rolled out back in March and April of 2020. But what we want to do is just provide a little bit of overview of a couple of different programs as well, so that people are aware of the range of funding and assistance opportunities that were part of this Economic Aid Act. So with that, why don't you go ahead? Hey, Teddy, you're going to run the slides?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So here's just a little bit of a breakdown of how our presentation is laid out, and I should say that this was designed initially for the Washington Arts Commission. So there's a program here that might be of interest to some of your friends and other colleagues, called the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant, that was really kind of the centerpiece of our presentation to the Arts Commission. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about that, so that everybody's aware that there is this unique opportunity for people that are running theaters and museums and the like, to get some actual grant funding through SBA. Then we're going to transition over to really talking about and digging into the specifics of this new opportunity for a Paycheck Protection Program loan. And as the outline kind of indicates, I think it's a more thoughtful approach. I hope you're going to find that to be the case, in that it not only will allow for people that did not receive a PPP loan previously to get a PPP loan now, but also, and maybe more importantly, it's going to facilitate what we're calling second draw PPP loans for businesses that meet certain operational requirements and are in certain industry segments. And certainly the food service and accommodation is really right at the heart of this. So we're going to talk about that, kind of how the program is going to work, how you might make access to apply for one of these loans, and just a little bit about the mechanics. Additionally, I think a lot of people are out there right now with existing PPP loans, maybe having been used, that have yet to be processed for forgiveness, which is sort of the center component of the PPP program, that these loans are forgivable. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening on the forgiveness front. And in fact, as part of that Economic Aid Act, some of the forgiveness parameters have been changed, and I think changed for the better. So finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit at the end about a couple of other programs that were included in the Economic Aid Act, just to make sure that folks have an overall awareness of what is actually out there now. Go ahead, Teddy. And I think I talked about that I think the PPP program that's being rolled out is maybe a little bit more strategic and thoughtful in its design than the first time out. And I think the overall intent of this package, the economic aid program itself, is really to target this assistance. And so as I mentioned, the accommodation food service industry is going to be really at the forefront, I think, of what was being considered when the new PPP loan product was developed, and I think you're going to see that. Additionally, just some of the parameters of these programs are really focused on making sure that those folks in what SBA would consider to be underserved communities, whether we're talking about certain rural areas, urban areas that maybe have higher unemployment, certain ethnic communities that have had difficulty accessing these programs in the past. The design of the this Economic Aid Act is such that really there are some guardrails that are going to make sure that for example, certain types of lending institutions are going to receive opportunities to access PPP funds and provide those monies to their communities. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that's going to work. But again, my takeaway, I guess, is that this is a little bit more of a targeted set of programs, and I think you're going to see that, and in particular with respect to the accommodation food service sector. Go ahead, Teddy. So I just want, as I said, I want to talk a little bit about just very briefly about that Shuttered Venue Operator Grant, if only because I know that some of you have associates that might be involved in that sector, and that this is important information that we want to communicate. Then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Janie to really dig into this new iteration of the Paycheck Protection Program. Finally, I'm going to come back and just make sure that folks are aware of a couple of other programs that are out there, one of which is the continued existence of the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program that may be a fit for certain businesses, perhaps in combination with the PPP program. Why don't you go ahead, Teddy? Thanks. So very briefly on the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant Program, it's a situation where SBA has been given $15 billion to provide grants to this particular segment of our economy and of our communities. And we're really talking about venue operators and venue managers. We're talking about theaters, live performing theaters, perhaps movie theater venues. We're talking about museums and a range of other types of businesses. But the idea here is a recognition that really those entities have been pretty much decimated as a result of the pandemic. And this is going to be an opportunity for perhaps some recoupment of the lost revenues that they've experienced over the last 9-10 months anyway. As you can see on the slide, it's going to be a revenue-based analysis with an opportunity to receive up to 45% of annual revenues in grants, up to as much as $10 million per entity. And as I indicated before, there's going to be a set aside to make sure that some of those smaller venues are going to have access to this funding. That $2 million is actually supposed to be $2 billion. So $2 billion out of the $15 billion is being set aside to make sure that those entities with 50 or fewer employees are going to get access to this funding. Why don't you go ahead, Teddy? So a little bit about who we're talking about. Zoos and aquariums could come into play. Theatrical producers, live venue operators, promoters, and the like. So you kind of get a sense of who we're talking about here. Obviously, these are entities and organizations that are really critical to the vitality of our communities. So we want to make sure that people are aware of this opportunity and going to be able to access this when it is made available. Go ahead, Teddy. A little bit more about the grant amount itself. As I said, it's really going to be a revenue-based calculation for folks that qualify, and it's going to be a maximum of 45% of annual revenues, up to as much as $10 million. I don't believe there's a minimum grant amount. Go ahead, Teddy. Thanks. And this is kind of an interesting approach that they're taking. This is not as restrictive in terms of the what can be done with the money if you will, as the PPP program. So you can see here, really the idea is to help these organizations cover the conceivable range of operating expenses and to recoup money that would have been used for those purposes, and really hopefully put these organizations in a position where they're going to be able to kind of weather the remaining storm to the point where they're going to be able to actually start to get paying customers back in. Go ahead, Teddy. This is just a little bit about how the rollout is going to work, and I should say that the program is not yet available. We're anticipating still several weeks just to ensure that the infrastructure is in place to be able to handle all of the applications that are anticipated. The program is actually going to be administered out of SBA's Office of Disaster Assistance. And you can see here that the idea is to sort of target those organizations that were impacted the greatest first, and then sort of a tiered approach as the program is implemented. I think it's fair to say that there's going to be considerable demand for this program or product. And so with that in mind, one of the things that we want to make sure that people are doing is that they are gathering up some of the necessary documentation that they logically are going to need to apply for one of these grants. So for example, financial statements are going to be critical to establish the degree of impact. And also any other kind of organizational documentation, so that the entity is going to be able to clearly demonstrate the type of organization that it is, to ensure that it is going to be within the eligibility parameters. Go ahead, Teddy. So a little more information on this, and this is where I want to make a pitch to folks to continue. If this is of interest to you at all, or any of your colleagues, this information is going to be updated on an ongoing basis. There's an extensive set of FAQs out there on our website already on the Shuttered Venue program. And I would just encourage people to sign up for updates from SBA, and it's easily done. All you have to do is go to sba.gov/updates, and you go in there and put in your email address. And so when things like new versions of program guidelines are put out, whether we're talking about this grant program or the PPP program, you're going to get that information as soon as it's published and available. So go ahead, Teddy. So with that, here I want to, as I indicated, I really want to save the bulk of our time to let Janie go into the new version of the PPP. And again, my take on this is it's a more hopefully a more targeted approach to this program, a little bit more thoughtful. And I feel like it is going to be something that's pretty well suited, certainly for the accommodation and food service sector. And Janie will talk a little bit more about how that's going to work. But with that, why don't I go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Janie Sacco, and then I'm going to come back and just talk a little bit about our economic injury disaster loan program and a couple of other things, just to make sure that folks are aware of the range of programs that were part of this Economic Aid Act. So with that, why don't you go ahead, Janie, and I'll mute myself and drop off for a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you all for attending this morning, and thank you, Teddy, for inviting us today. So I just want to give you a few key dates. On January 11th, the PPP opened for first draw borrowers that were in underserved communities. So ethnic minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, and businesses that were physically located in underserved markets had first opportunity for the first draw PPP loan. Then January 13, it rolled out for that same community to have an opportunity for the second draws. The lenders for that particular round were all what we call community financial institutions, as identified in the little box. What's a CFI? So again, we were really trying as an agency to get out there and market and this product to and get loans to the underserved communities. So on January 15th, the first and second draws rolled out to lending institutions who had an asset base of $1 billion or less. Again, typically those institutions focus on community-based lending, and it just opened up a broader avenue for people to apply. And then on January 19th, the program opened up to all participating lending institutions that were authorized to do PPP loans. So all of the lenders are required to meet particular criteria and have an authorization to do those loans. So January 19th was the larger national opening date for everybody. I do want to point out that March 31st, this time around, is when all PPP applications must be submitted by, and an SBA authorization be extended to reserve those funds for you, or until the funds run out. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what is a first draw PPP loan. All of you who did not apply for a PPP loan in 2020 prior to the sunsetting of the program on August 8th are eligible to be first draw borrowers. So the thing that I do want to let you know is that, just for general information, the first draw PPP loans opened up to a series of additional borrowing types, including 501c6s and news reporting agencies, newspapers, and some of the media. There are restrictions on the number of employees that they can have per location to make sure that we're still focusing on the smaller based media. The other thing that did open up was the tourism bureaus, if they were a designated marketing entity, such as a tourist bureau for a city or a community, those became eligible. So we did broaden the reach based on demand and need in the community. So the big change for everybody really now is that when you're talking about your covered period can run a minimum of 56 days or 8 weeks to a maximum of 24 days or 24 weeks or 168 days. But the other thing is that if you use all of your proceeds prior to that 24-week period, you can select your own end of covered date period. So when does your covered period actually start? It starts technically on the date of funding. However, there are some institutions who are using the date of the loan as the date of funding. So what I want you to do, if that one or 2 days makes a difference for you in terms of your use of proceeds, please check with your lender to make sure that you are using the appropriate date for your lender. And your covered period starts on the day one is the day you receive the funding, okay? Or the date of the note, again, depending on the lender. Certain borrowers may request an increase to their original PPP loan amount. So if you're a partnership, for example, or a seasonal employer on the first draw loan that you received, there are allowances for you to be able to modify or increase that first draw loan that you had in 2020. So you need to work with your lender to be able to do that. All right. And then again, as I said earlier, you must apply on or before March 31st or until the congressional appropriations expire, which is a fancy way of saying until the money runs out. So next slide, please. So first draw loan eligibility. Again, I touched on this a little bit. The new eligibility is the housing cooperatives, destination marketing organizations, 501c6s, eligible news organizations. Who is still eligible? Definitely all business entities that are sole proprietorships, independent contractors, self-employed individuals, partnerships, corporations, limited liability companies, nonprofit organizations that were designated as a 501c3, veterans organizations that were designated as a 501c19, and tribal businesses. So we are really opening this up to major groups of entities that have really actually been impacted negatively by this coronavirus. Next slide, please. Well, now we're talking about what is the second draw PPP loan. So if you were a borrower who received a first draw loan, you have 300 employees or less, and you have a demonstrated reduction of 25% or more in gross receipts when you're comparing information in 2019 to 2020 in terms of your gross receipts, you are now have eligibility. So let's touch on a little bit about how do you calculate that 25% reduction in gross receipts. You can compare it annually between 2019 and 2020, or you may use any one of the quarters on a calendar basis for a direct comparison. So 2019 first quarter to 2020 first quarter, 2019 second quarter to 2020 second quarter, and so forth. It is a calendar quarter. If you are a business that has a fiscal year end other than 12/31, then you would be able to use second, third, and fourth quarters on your fiscal year basis to be able to demonstrate that. If you, and I'll give you an example. Let's say you had a fiscal year end of November 30th. You could use second, third, or fourth quarters on a calendar essentially basis to be able to do that. So it's a little bit different, but that's basically the intent there. If your business started in this 2020 on or before February 15th, then you can use first quarter 2020 as your base quarter and compare that to any of the other 3 quarters in 2020 to demonstrate your 25% or more reduction in gross receipts. So what's a little bit unique about the second draw loan is that you have the ability to use 2019 as your basis for calculating your average monthly payroll, or you can use your 2020 payroll costs as the basis for calculating your average monthly payroll. Or if you're applying this month or in March, you have the ability to use a rolling 12 months. So the criteria here is a little bit different to enable you to have the most flexibility for this second draw calculation. Additional information here is that you would need to have used or have the intent to use your full first draw PPP loan before you have the second draw and before it's dispersed. You need to have no more than 300 employees. And again, you demonstrate that 25% minimum reduction in revenue between comparable quarters or annually in 2019 to 2020. Next slide, please. So now we're moving on to PPP loan forgiveness. Borrowers must apply for forgiveness through their lender. The lender then submits their recommendation to the SBA on the amount of the loan that they are going to forgive. And just some brief updates here. Last year, the economic injury disaster loan advances were deducted from your forgiveness on your PPP loan. The SBA is going back and doing a reconciliation with all of the lenders who had borrowers that were impacted by that. And your lender will be credited, or a deposit will be made to your lender so that they can zero down your PPP loan balance for the impact of the EIDL advance that was not forgiven. So just understand that the EIDL advances are no longer going to be impacted by have an impact on your PPP loan. The forgiven PPP loans are not taxable income. Expenses that are paid with your PPP proceeds are tax deductible. And you can consult the IRS or your CPA for additional information on that, but that's a very significant change from last year. So the other thing is that there have been a significant increase in the number of eligible operating expenses that are allowed. And if you have not filed for forgiveness yet for your 2020 loan, then you may also use those permissible expenses as part of your forgiveness application for your loan in 2020. So they are retroactive. The other thing I do want to point out is that for loans that are $150,000 or less, you now have the ability to use the 3508S form for forgiveness. You are self-certifying your forgiveness amount. And I do really want you to pay attention to the requirements for doing that, especially if your loan that you're requesting forgiveness on is more than $50,000, because you're responsible for validating that you're in compliance with the fact that you paid all of your employees at least 75% or more of their pre-COVID wage, and that you're complying with the FTE requirements. Next slide, please. So what to do now and additional resources? Well, first of all, if you need to contact your lender if you want to go through an application process. If you do not have a lender, we have a resource on SBA.gov that is SBA.gov/lender match. It opens your opportunities up nationwide to approach lenders who are doing PPP loans. And you just need to put in a little bit of information about your business and your financial need, and then they will contact you. So again, that is a nationwide access to PPP lenders. You can also go in to SBA.gov/paycheck protection find and look at a lender map for your market area. So what I'd also like to let you know is please check out the SBA.gov/PPP website for the most up-to-date documents for the application and the forgiveness, and how to calculate your loan amounts to the maximum allowance for your business type and your employee numbers. It's an excellent resource, and it's very step-by-step. And if you need to have additional support, you can always contact us at the Seattle District Office. And as Mark mentioned, you can subscribe to the e-newsletter. Our phone number at the SBA Seattle District Office is 206-553-7310. And because we are not in the office, we are requesting that you leave a message on that line, and we will do our best to get back to you the same day. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. And I'm going to turn this back over to Mark. Mark may be having.
Thanks, Janie. I'm back.
Nope.
I apologize. I had to reposition myself briefly. Thank you for your patience. Hey, so finally, again, I believe that the, in terms of the impact of the Economic Aid Act, the PPP is really kind of the focal point, but SBA continues to have other programs available, and I just wanted to touch on those briefly. First and foremost, some of you might recall that early on in the pandemic, back in March of last year, we actually rolled out what we call the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. And part of the Economic Aid Act was actually to extend what we call the EIDL program for another year. So it was set to expire on December 31st of this past year, and the bottom line is it continues to be available. So what I wanted to do is just talk briefly about it. If you've made application and received an EIDL loan already, I hope that process was satisfactory. One of the things that I would offer is that there does continue to be an opportunity to request a loan increase if you were looking to get more money advanced. You can't get a second EIDL loan, but you can actually, in certain instances, get an increase of your existing EIDL loan. This is an interesting program, I think, in that it is certainly different from the PPP. This is a true loan, true business indebtedness that needs to be paid back. But it's relatively low cost indebtedness that's going to be structured in a way to really limit the impact on business cash flow. You can see here on the slide, we're talking about 3.75% financing, fixed rate, up to as much as 30 years. So we're going to structure this to really make that monthly payment as benign as possible for business owners, and there's a built-in 12-month deferment period, so that for the first year after receiving these funds, you're not responsible for making any payments. But the idea here is really sort of along the lines of some of those grant programs, or the one that I described before, really to maybe provide an opportunity for a business to replenish their working capital. So this is really term working capital financing is what we're talking about, and use the money to cover those regular operating expenses that you guys might incur, whether we're talking about rent, whether we're talking about paying employees, whether we're talking about paying for inventory, utilities, what have you. Really anything other than sort of non-operating expenses like acquisition of competitor business or something like that, that can't be accomplished with the EIDL program, but a lot of other things can. So this is, again, an opportunity for low cost, long-term, flexible working capital financing. It's accessible through the SBA website, sba.gov/coronavirus, and within a couple of clicks, you should be able to actually get to our portal, our application portal. And the application process itself is really, really quite streamlined. So you're probably talking about 10 or 15 minutes to work through that. We've essentially capped the program right now at $150,000. But $20 billion, I'm sorry, there continues to be significant funding available to support this program. At one time, I believe there was a lending capacity of somewhere in the range of $350 billion to support this program. So several billion remain available. If you want to follow up at all on the idea of a loan increase and what's involved in that, I would encourage you to reach out to Janie or myself, Janie.Sacco@SBA.gov, and I'm Mark.Costello at SBA.gov, and we can kind of get you steered in the right direction on that. Why don't we go ahead, Teddy? Um, just a little bit more about this it's pretty broadly available, this economic injury disaster loan, and I think it's important too that it can be a supplement or a complementary piece to a PPP loan. So as long as you're not using the proceeds for the exact same purpose, you're going to be in good shape. So again, you're going to have more flexibility as far as what you can do with the EIDL program, and perhaps use the PPP loan to really focus in on paying your employees. Go ahead, Teddy. I think we're good with that. SBA.gov/disaster is a way to get to this. But again, I'm a proponent of SBA.gov/coronavirus, and it's going to get you to the range of programs and the most updated information, and keeping in mind that SBA.gov/updates as a way to make sure that you're going to get that as it's rolled out. Go ahead, Teddy. A little bit more on what is included in the Economic Aid Act. This is an interesting one. Those of you that might have gone through the process of applying for an EIDL loan the first time around, you may have had some experience with what we were calling an EIDL advance. So this is back in maybe April or May, right in there. And we had $20 billion to distribute in the form of these cash advances that were sort of part of the EIDL portal. You didn't have to get an EIDL loan to get an EIDL advance, and we pushed the money out the door, and folks got money based on their number of employees. There was an expectation at a certain point that they were going to receive $10,000, and it turned out that maybe they got 1,000 or 2 or 3. And then some folks that made application for that first EIDL advance, the money had been exhausted and they didn't get anything. So this targeted EIDL advance is an attempt to perhaps remedy some of the challenges that were associated with that first EIDL advance. And so the idea here is that if you were somebody that made application for an EIDL advance the first time around, and you either got some money but didn't get up to $10,000, or you didn't get any money because the money was used up, you are going to be receiving a communication from SBA. So SBA is actually going to take their list of all of those businesses, and they're going to reach out to those folks. And what they're going to do is try to determine if that business is eligible for one of these new targeted advance. And what do I mean by targeted? Targeted being that they're located in an IRS designated low income community. That's one of the parameters to define the targeted aspect. And secondly, that they have suffered a sufficient loss in revenues to justify this grant. And by sufficient, we're talking about 30% over any 8-week period, I believe, between 2020 and 2019. So if a business can demonstrate those things, and they did not receive the full $10,000 grant the first time around, the idea is that SBA is going to make up that difference in the form of a new grant. So that grant could be $10,000 for those businesses that applied earlier and the money was gone. Or it could be something like 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 to those businesses that maybe got $1, $2, or $3, or $4,000. So this is going to be an SBA driven process, but it is going to, I think, be one of those cases where people need to be aware that this could be coming, and that they need to be able to make a determination that, this isn't spam, this isn't somebody trying to commit some kind of a fraudulent act, that this is in fact going to be an SBA effort. They've, I believe, started this here a couple of days ago. Earlier this week, I think Monday evening, they were going to start sending out these emails. So I just want people to be aware of this. And if you are trying to kind of validate, is this for real? That kind of thing, which logically you might do, feel free to reach out to our office, and we want to make sure you're comfortable with it. And we can also probably help you kind of work through what might be required to get the maximum amount of money that you should be getting if you do in fact qualify for this grant. So why don't we go ahead, Teddy? And with that, I think we're kind of at the end of the high level coverage of these programs we wanted to talk about. The only other thing I wanted to make sure on is that if anybody out in the audience today, or anybody that listens to this in the coming days, has an existing SBA loan, like what we would call an SBA 7A guaranteed loan, or an SBA 504 loan, or even an SBA micro loan. There was one other provision in the Economic Aid Act that could be very beneficial, and that was a continuation of what we call the debt payment program, or the debt relief program. Essentially, what will happen is that SBA is actually going to make a number of monthly payments on those loans on your behalf. So SBA is actually going to pay your lender directly for anywhere between 3 and 8 monthly payments. It's going to depend on the circumstances, but I believe this is something that's being rolled out now. But it definitely will be coming, and there's going to be a benefit to those folks that have those existing SBA loans, and it's going to be an opportunity to preserve some working capital. And I think there was a pretty significant impact with this tool the first time around. So I wanted to just make sure that the audience here today is aware of that, and that's something that you might be looking for, talking to your lender about, if you do in fact have an existing SBA loan. So hey, with that, Teddy, why don't I turn it back over to you?